Hi there, thanks for tuning in. Nice to get a chance to address all of you in these difficult times. I'm here today to talk a bit about design, what is good design, what is design, and design philosophy, and how about making it personal and being dedicated, and also a bit about the process, what is behind the whole design setup. A short introduction. I'm here today at our studio 365 North, which is located in Aarhus, which is the second largest city in Denmark. And here next to me you can see a few pictures from the office where we on a daily basis are working six persons. And there's also, as you can see, a small collage of different designs, different design projects we have been working on for the past years, both upholstery, wooden furniture, indoor, outdoor lighting, etc. All kinds of different designs we are working on. And I would say part of the whole thing is actually one of the big questions: what is design? To me, design is not a question about a product. Design is about a process. It is the process that is actually combining that you might have a vision or an idea, and that is the whole process that's building a bridge into becoming a real product. So for me, that is the design part. That is actually the process, and that process is quite often you might tend to see it as a straight line, but quite often it's not. It's a bit of a winding road, and quite often it's a bit like peeling layers of an onion. And whenever you sort of turn a corner in the process and you tend to think, "Oh, I got it, that's a good idea, great," you tend to experience something new in the process, which quite often can be very interesting and often turns out actually to make for better product in the end. Shortly, I'm actually educated as a fashion designer many years ago, and also working with graphic design on a daily basis here in the studio alongside product design and interior design. And I quite often find it an advantage to be able to work with design in different directions, because they tend to reflect on each other. So whenever you're interested in fashion, you tend to have an interest in interior and graphic design also reflects back on interior and fashion and so forth. So it's quite often a good way of being inspired to actually pay attention to other directions of design rather than just furniture and interior. A big question in the whole setup is actually what is good design, and I think good design it's sort of a strange question, because really you can't answer it. It's a matter of who it's meant for and who is going to use it. So it's a very individual answer you will get there, because if you need a cheap product for the mass market and you actually achieve that, well, then you have a good design. And if you have a high-end product which is meant to be very exclusive and can be expensive, and you actually achieve that in the process, in that case it is a good design. But if you're aiming for a cheap mass market but end up with something that's too expensive or not cost effective enough, then you actually fail in the process, even though it might be a good looking product, but it might not actually achieve the goal you intended. So it's very much a matter of defining what is it you need from your design, and that is actually what in the end will define what is a good design. And especially when we are talking about furniture, which is very much a part of interior design, anyway, my philosophy is you need to be personal. You need to add a bit of yourself into the mix. That is what makes the whole difference. Yes, you can go and buy nice furniture pieces, and they might be the foundation for the whole interior, but you need to add something that is a bit off in the process, that is also making it interesting, making you sort of experience that it is part of yourself. And keep in mind, a good interior design is actually where you feel good and where you feel at home. So keep that in mind. Not everything can be bought, but it can be a great foundation for starting that process. And the whole process about interior design and products for interior design is also, the starting point is that there's a range of tools you can work with. If you see on the collage next to me, there are just a rough example of two directions where we have sort of been playing around with the soft direction and the more sleek and modern direction. And both of them represent good design, and they can be nice interiors, but they're very different, and it's a very different expression you get for them. And when you actually go further into the process and sort of along the way in the direction, there is a set of tools that can actually make a huge difference in how you perceive the interior and how you can actually change the same room in different directions. First of all, you might have materials. What are you working with? Are they soft and warm? Are they sleek and smooth surfaces? What is the overall expression you're aiming for, and how tactile are they? It can be something nice to touch, it can be wooden surfaces, it can be steel, chrome or leather, whatever. And especially textiles are a huge thing when we talk interior design. You can have some of the same products, but changing the textiles will give you a whole different product. And lighting, both the natural lighting in the room, but also the light setting that you are creating. Basically, light is making the room, so it's a big thing. You might actually be able to have the same room setting, and simply just the way you arrange your lighting can change the whole room from being cold and uninviting to being warm and very cozy. So that is a very important thing. And all of these things are sort of a toolbox you can play around with when you are creating an interior or when you are working with furniture design, because it's basically the same thing that's going on there. And sort of this can quite often be a starting point in the process, but beside this, often in the process of creating a design, there are often two ways to work with the client. One way is that you feel, or you define, or you experience a gap in the collection or in the market. There is a need for a product, there's something we need, and then you basically create some ideas and introduce them to the client, and you can have an open discussion about it. Or it can be the other way around. There is a briefing from the client defining a certain sofa size or whatever, something we need to work on, a direction, more modern, more cozy, something. So that's normally the two starting points when working with a design project for a client. And in that process, there are a lot of things you need to take into consideration. We are sort of back to the toolbox. You need to think of, quite often the process is you start up, you get a few ideas and you think, ooh, that's nice looking. But then you have to take, what's the price factor? What's the ergonomics like? Will it actually fit the design? How about an environment? Is there anything we need to think about their use of materials? How about look? How about style? So it's a bit like making a soup. You need to make all of these ingredients come together, and when they come together in a good way, that's quite often when you actually end up with a good design and a good product. And quite often in the process, even though you as a designer are used to working with it, you tend to be a bit surprised how many factors actually come into play. But even though that you might experience some of them as an annoyance in the process, they quite often turn out to actually direct the design in a better way. There is a big difference also depending on what the product is meant to be used for, and of course the obvious thing is, if we talk about contract furniture, they have to be super durable because they're going to have a hard life. And on the other hand, you have lighting design where you in many cases have a low contact product, so you can be more artistic with some of the lighting designs, but it's a big factor you have to think about also, touching point, contact points, and wear and tear in the product. Not saying that it's a bad thing, but it's interesting to play around with all these factors you have to think about. I have 4 pictures here next to me, and I'll get deeper into it, but you might think, what on earth do they have to do with the design process? But basically that, in my case anyway, is the starting point. Because quite often it's not the big things, it's everyday objects, small bits and pieces. You find a corner here, a detail there, something you see in the nature, a stone on the beach, or could be something else. And this constant curiosity about things is sort of what's driving the whole process behind the design process. And it's not like it's a one-to-one process where you see a thing and then you immediately think, ooh, this could become this type of project. That's not how it works. It's quite often just part of a process or a concept. You see in one thing and you tend to turn it into something else. And I would say if you have this curiosity, and I guess that goes for many designers, you're always at work 24/7, because you basically just can't put it down. You always will be inspired, and all this information tend to be stored almost. I see it as a mental battery where you're actually picking up on in a subconscious way, picking up all of these bits and details, and then later on, when you need them, you can simply just draw creative power from this mental battery. So it's I think it's a super good process, and you might not even be aware about what's going on because it's sort of behind the scene thing. And in the process of all of this sketching, I sort of have a personal philosophy that you can make anything look good on a sketch. Not a problem, because it's a fantastic way to work with it, and you can draw ideas and concepts and stuff like that, and it's going to take you literally seconds to create something. But the other part of it, which I also find very interesting, is actually when you start working with a design on the computer, and especially in any kind of 3D software, it's sort of a hard reality contact, because you might actually experience that what looked good on a sketch doesn't really meet reality. So it's a super process for me anyway to sort of root out any problems or issues that you might just have glossed over in the sketching process, because it's so easy. But it's great to be able to starting up being super creative and then narrowing it down to being more specific. I have a few examples just sort of to illustrate what's going on in the process. And the first of them, as you can see, the starting point, the Imola chair, where the initial, not as a one-on-one concept, but the initial point was actually a tennis ball, which was sort of the starting point. Today I was looking at a tennis ball, and if you look at a tennis ball, you can see it actually consists of 2 identical shapes that are interlocking with each other. And I sort of was, with the eye of course, just tracing the lines around the tennis ball, and find them quite interesting, and almost felt it was a bit like a chair shape or a seat shape. So initially that was actually the starting point for the Imola chair, and there are a few sketches also here next to me where you can see part of the process where you're simply picking apart the tennis ball, taking one of these shapes and cutting into it, and finally basically ending up with the core shape for the Imola chair. And there are a few other examples also shown here next to me. Adelaide chair, more concept rather than a shape inspiration. An acorn, if you take an acorn and you loosen the top part of the acorn, there is this nice smooth feeling of the top being able to slide around on the acorn because they just match together. And that was basically the concept I was working with on the Adelaide chair, where you have an outer shell and you have an inner shell, and the way they fit together was sort of the concept I adapted from the acorn inspiration, that they feel like they can almost slide together. And also for the outrigger lamp, more a one-on-one inspiration, where it was actually these wooden toy blocks you can insert into each other, which was the starting point for that one, where it's basically the concept where you can position the lamp unit the same way by inserting the lamp unit as a peg into this wooden base part of the lamp that's creating the concept behind the lamp. And for the final one was the Hampton sofa, which was also named the same way as the inspiration initially started, because you can see we have basically a picture of a New York skyline, and that was sort of the starting point. I wanted to create a sofa which is not just one level but different levels, and that is achieved by having low arms. You can have a lowered back, you can have a raised back, so it's sort of multi heights in the same sofa, a bit like a New York skyline, and that was also what led to the design, and actually of course called it Hampton due to the area in New York. Another aspect that is becoming increasingly more interesting when talking about design is that we tend to have it more separated. Early on we talk about contract design or design for work, and we have design for home. But the way it's going today, I mean, the boundaries between what is home and what is work is actually becoming way more blurry at the moment, because at some point, I would say especially the computer has been very much part of that revolution or evolution, depending on speed, because you're no longer chained to your desk anymore. You can basically work anywhere you like. So we tend to experience work and office in a different way, and I would say especially in these corona times, I think many of us have actually experienced that we are actually able to move our workspace away from the office and into the home for a long period of time, of course with some difficulties, but in general with no bigger problems. So the office areas tends to become much more homey and much more cozy and casual compared to what we see at home. So it's quite interesting to work in that field as well, that you actually have to not just think about home interior or work interior, but they actually blending together, and you might actually end up with some of the designs being able to fulfill more functions, because it's all of a sudden they are opening up to being more work oriented as well, so they might have other facilities connected to them. This was sort of a short presentation or introduction to the way I see design, a few examples and about design philosophy. So thank you very much for listening to this, and have a good day and stay safe, all of you. Bye.